CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Jump-starting China's economy. Beijing's top decision-making body pledges to stabilise growth and adjust economic policies to give the world a boost.
Our other headlines: election stalemate. Spain fails to produce a decisive winner, raising the prospect of another election.
Twitter's famous blue bird flies the nest as the social media giant unveils new branding.
More Greek islands issue evacuation orders for thousands of people as the country battles devastating wildfires. We'll be reporting from Rhodes.
And who knew that a plastic doll and a nuclear holocaust were the ingredients for a box office bonanza? Barbenheimer brings a record-breaking weekend at the movies.
China will step up economic policy adjustments and focus on expanding domestic demand. That's the pledge from Beijing's top decision-making body, which says it'll stabilise growth in the second half of this year.
It's part of a raft of new measures announced by leaders to bolster the world's second-largest economy. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Li Jianhua. So, China's Politburo held this key meeting to talk about economic policy. What was discussed?
The Chinese authorities said that China's economy faces new challenges at this point, and the post-pandemic recovery has been slow, mainly because of weak domestic demand and also complex external environment. So why is this meeting so important? One thing is because China's economy has been performing, it is growing slowly, more slowly than expected, and the conference will set the tone for China's economic policies in the second half of this year. So everyone is eyeing what the government will do, what will be the priorities. A lot of topics and methods have been touched upon by the government. But at the end of the day, what the Chinese government trying to do at this point is trying to stabilize the economy, as you said just now, by boosting domestic spending, fine-tuning policies for China's property market, and also resolving local government debt. When it comes to boosting domestic spending, we know that the government a couple of days ago said that they're calling on the local governments to boost consumption of cars, electronics and household products, especially in China's rural areas, to rev up the economy. If we talk about the property market, but if we look at the wording of this report right now, I'm quoting some of them, that is adapting to the major change in supply-demand relations, which is a bit different from what the government said in April, that was promoting stable and healthy development of property market. So what does it mean for China's property market? That's the point. When it comes to local government debt, what the Chinese central government is doing now is it is calling for the local governments to for the faster issuance of more local government bonds, which are limited by an annual quota at this point. And of course, on top of that, prudent monetary policy and proactive fiscal policy will also be rolled out at the end for the second half of this year.
Jianhua, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Li Jianhua. Wang Dan is chief economist at Hang Seng Bank in China.
Well, the market has been long waiting for clear signals on what's going to come in terms of monetary expansion. And this Politburo meeting is one of the few events that can actually set the tone, not just for the macroeconomic policy in the next few months, but also for the coming year. And we have heard that policymakers are determined to give economic stimulus, and that's quite key to hold up the market confidence.
So you talked about setting the tone. Does this signify a change in the tone?
There is a clear stress on the intention to do more on both the fiscal and the monetary front, and that's quite clear. The problem is that there is still a lack of detail in what's announced today. The hope is that once the top meeting like this set the tone, then the functional departments in the ministry level and local governments can finally make more detailed plans. The tone's change is quite clear in terms of housing expansion and also in terms of consumption support. So maybe we'll see more policies in those two fronts.
And President Xi talked about the complex external environment in the meeting. What did he mean by that?
Well, China doesn't have a particularly friendly neighbors, and it doesn't just have a border dispute with countries like Japan and the Philippines, but also has a lot of tensions with India. And it looks like that China-U.S. relations seem to have improved a bit with more of the top-level communication, but actually the underlying competition is only getting more fierce. The high-tech sector's decoupling is real. So for China, it's not just about opening up its market to the rest of the world. It's also about how to find the next market for growth overseas. It's getting quite difficult for China to find such a market that's comparable to the U.S. and Europe.
And what about the stance on the private economy? How will that impact corporate confidence?
The private economy suffered the most during the 3 years of COVID, and especially during the 2022 economic lockdown. For city services, they were basically wiped out if you're a small business. But this year, there seemed to be very little support actually helping them to borrow cheaply or to ease their burden in debt. So now the private investors seem to have more reason to be hopeful, since that they are about to get more targeted support. It's just unclear when those support will come and whether interest rate will be lower in the coming months.
It's probably fair to say we've seen some fairly disappointing numbers coming out of China recently. Will this now kickstart domestic consumption?
I believe the central government is quite clear on how difficult it is to stimulate consumption without raising income. In today's Politburo meeting, there was a special mention on the intention to boost the consumption through an increase in income. I'm quite curious on how the central government plan to do that, because for Western countries, it's quite natural to give cash transfer to households. But for Chinese government, they have been long relying on giving cash to corporates rather than to the households. If there's a mentality change, we might see more of those direct cash transfer to low-income families, and that could be the start of the consumption recovery.
Spain is in political deadlock after the first election in nearly 4 years proved inconclusive. The close-run contest could now see the country return to the polls later this year, as both the left and the right scramble to secure enough seats to form a coalition government. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports now from Madrid.
A dramatic night in Spanish politics that left more questions than answers. The headquarters of the Partido Popular were prepared for a big night of celebrations. The centre-right party were predicted to race into government with the help of the far-right Vox party. That didn't happen. While the PP won the most votes, they fell short of the 176 seats needed to form a coalition with their hardline partners. Vox underperformed and lost nearly a third of the seats they won last time out. As the results poured in, it became increasingly clear that Pedro Sánchez and his Socialist Workers' Party PSOE fared better than expected, marginally improving their position compared to 2019. The left-wing platform Sumar, which encompasses a dozen parties, gained a 12% share of the vote, giving the acting government strong support but not enough to get them over the line. Experts believe this election has given a clear sign of the changing political landscape in Spain.
People had become a little bit scary of the extremes, and now there is a movement towards a centripetal movement towards the center. All right, now so voters are actually starting to make sense of all this like crazy scenario with the polarization, and they are moving towards the center, and that's good news probably for democracy, and not to play on the extremes as much as we have been playing until now.
With a hung parliament increasingly likely, weeks of negotiations will now be needed to see if either side can garner enough support from smaller regional parties to form a coalition. Right now, there doesn't appear to be a clear path ahead for the right or the left to form a government. Brussels will have kept a close watch on Sunday night's elections. Spain currently holds the 6-month rotating presidency of the EU, and they will be keen to see an established coalition formed at the earliest possible stage. Congress won't reconvene until mid-August, where both sides will seek to garner enough support to form a coalition government, putting their Prime Minister candidates forward in a vote. If they fail to vote in a winner, then 2 months later, Spain will once again go to the polls. Ken Brown, CGTN, Madrid.
Christian Schulz is chief European economist at Citi. I asked him what he thought all this political uncertainty meant for Spain's economy.
Well, it casts a cloud of uncertainty over the outlook, in particular at a time when the Spanish government has large amounts of money to spend from the European Recovery Fund, the post-pandemic recovery fund, 750 billion, of which Spain is one of the greatest recipients. So it doesn't help if there's no political clarity on that. Furthermore, there are choices to make in terms of bringing the budget deficit down, whether to cut spending or raise taxes. So all of this creates uncertainty which may weigh on investment and therefore not good for growth.
I guess regardless who might win the next election, the political and economic landscape remains the same, doesn't it?
Yes, in general, the tough choices that have to be made on the fiscal side remain the same. But in terms of the economic outlook, things may flip on their head by the end of the year. At the moment, Spain enjoys a very strong summer season of tourism, strong employment as well, but high inflation. By the end of the year, inflation may be very low, but the growth slowdown may have been quite severe, and employment may be increasingly under threat. And that will make the picture very different. It will lead to a need for more jobs, perhaps. It will lead for more fiscal rebalancing, so even more tough choices to make.
Markets don't like uncertainty, do they? I'm just looking down at the scores on the doors. Madrid's IBEX 35 equity benchmark index falling as much as 1.8% in the early trading. Shares in other major Spanish lenders down between 1.4% and 2.6%. The Stock 600 Banks Index 0.4% lower. I mean, they don't like it, do they?
No, uncertainty is bad for growth, although we have, of course, had in Europe many episodes where it took a long time to form a government in different countries. Belgium, the Netherlands come to mind, and where the economy actually performed quite well. So it can happen that less interference by government is actually positive for growth. But at this current juncture, where rising interest rates, high inflation really pose a challenge to all economies, you want a government with a clear majority in charge that can settle the boat, that can steer the boat through this uncertainty.
Let's look ahead. I mean, what is your outlook for Spain and its economy and its politics?
We expect Spain to continue to outperform the rest of the euro area growth-wise. The tourism rebound helps at the moment. Much of the world is struggling with manufacturing. Spain is not particularly exposed to that. Employment is strong. More and more people are entering the labor force, and immigration is also relatively strong in Spain, and that boosts the potential of the economy. What it takes now is to balance the books. It takes a reduction in public debt, which then eases the fears about fiscal sustainability in Spain. The debt ratio, we think, is going to stay above 100% of GDP well until the end of the decade. And that's always a concern for markets, especially for bond markets.
British energy infrastructure developer Carlton Power has secured planning permission for a $960 million battery project in Manchester. The company says it's won planning approval to install the world's biggest known battery energy storage device on the site of a former coal-fired power plant. It says construction could begin in early 2024, with the plant operational by the end of 2025. The 1 gigawatt facility is expected to support the electricity grid in the northwest of England.
Ryanair has posted profits of almost $735 million for the 3 months to the end of June. That's around 4 times higher than the same period last year. Ryanair says its year-on-year comparisons were boosted by higher ticket prices and booming demand. But the airline has trimmed its passenger forecast due to Boeing aircraft delivery delays.
Twitter's famous bird logo is flying away as the social media platform unveils its new X logo. It's seen as the first step towards owner Elon Musk's ambition of changing the social media platform to a comprehensive app featuring audio, video messaging and banking. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Karina Mitchell in New York. So, Karina, Elon Musk has made plenty of changes since buying Twitter. Now he's changed the logo.
And,
what's he
Elon
up
Musk
to?
is a gift that keeps on giving. Ever since he acquired Twitter back in October for $44 billion, he's thrown out the rule book when it comes to that company and made some very controversial decisions. The latest coming just this weekend when, out of the blue, no pun intended, he decided that he wanted to rebrand, getting rid of that iconic bluebird symbol that we all know so well from around the world, replacing it with an X. He said he'd do it as soon as overnight if he found the right logo, but apparently came up with a temporary one that he likes for now. But who knows? Elon Musk, depending on what day of the week, changes his mind, it seems like. So is this temporary? Is it permanent? Who knows? But it could mean bye-bye birdie when it comes to that iconic logo that we all know and love. In fact, he's also said that tweets won't be called those anymore. They'll be called X's. And when asked what retweets would be, he said he might have to go back to the drawing board and think that one through again. But this is just the latest bizarre decision that comes since he's taken over Twitter. Of course, most recently, we know that he's limited the number of tweets people can read when it comes to user accounts. He also got rid of that verified check mark that was free, replacing it with a paid version. That made a lot of people super unhappy. But this logo came out night on Monday morning. It's now on the home page. It's on his profile page. If you log in to the X.com domain, you will be transferred to that logo as well. So certainly, lots of issues coming up with this. And many people want to know why X. Well, there is a history to that, in fact. And back in April, he actually merged Twitter with an entity called X Corp, which he owns. And he basically says he wants Twitter to be a catalyst for an everything app. And his CEO, his recently appointed CEO, actually chimed in on that in a series of tweets as well over the weekend. And she said that the app is to be, quote, an AI-powered global marketplace for ideas, goods, and services. It's obviously he likes the name. He uses it in SpaceX. I don't know if you remember, but he was also a co-founder of PayPal, which was originally called X.com before it rebranded back in 2001. And, of course, all of this comes as rival Meta has recently lost Threads, which has over 100 million users already. So definitely always a lot going on with that company. Jamie Robin.
Elsewhere, Karina, the Chinese battery maker CATL says that it's moving ahead with its partnership with the US car maker Ford after the US House of Representatives said it would investigate the plan. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, well, CGTN actually chimed in today saying that it is cooperating normally with this investigation. But let's backtrack really quickly. Back in February, Ford said that it wanted to build a plant in Michigan, and it would use CATL technology to do so, to the tune of $3.5 billion. Now, members from two committees, the Ways and Means Committee and the Select Committee on China, said in a joint letter that it wanted Ford to answer more questions. It demanded more answers to questions that it had. And basically, the committee said that if Ford relies on China for all of its EV battery production, the company, quote, will expose itself and U.S. taxpayers to the whims of the Chinese Communist Party and its politics. The committee also says that many of those jobs in those plants will be given to those Chinese, workers there, and that will take away from U.S. jobs because they will maintain operations and help set that up. Now, Ford says it's reviewing the letter. It says it just wants to build these batteries in the U.S. as opposed to importing lithium batteries from other countries like China. Jamie, Robin.
Karina, thank you. Our correspondent Karina Mitchell in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China's senior diplomat Wang Yi in Johannesburg meeting his BRICS counterparts ahead of the Leaders' Summit next month.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. There have been more attacks on Ukraine's port cities a week after the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal. Kyiv says several people were injured in Russian strikes that destroyed grain warehouses on the Danube River. In Odessa, at least one person was killed and 20 others injured in an attack on Sunday. The governor of Ukraine's Odessa region says that Russia's trying to block exports of Ukrainian grain to global markets.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's military says it's pushing back against Russian forces in the south and the east of the country. Ukrainian troops are advancing towards the cities of Melitopol and Berdyansk near the Azov Sea. Battles are also ongoing near the city of Bakhmut.
Russian authorities say a Ukrainian drone attack has hit an ammunition depot in Crimea. The blast stopped traffic on a major highway and a railway crossing the Black Sea Peninsula. Several nearby villages were evacuated.
Well, our correspondent Isabel Nakira is in Moscow.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has labeled the attack a terrorist act and also said it was a very cruel and senseless act since the bridge had not been used by them for months to supply, defense forces in their defense forces in Ukraine. The Minister of Defense has also said that Ukraine attempted to attack the Crimea using 17 drones, but Russia intercepted it using their air defense system. 11 of the drones were crashed in the Black Sea, while 3 fell on the Crimea territory, while 3 others were destroyed. And, of course, some villages were evacuated, and the bridge had to come to a standstill. Traffic had to come to a standstill for some time, temporarily. But later on, the traffic flow resumed, and everything is moving smoothly now.
There's also been a drone attack in Moscow. What more do we know?
Yes, Moscow woke up to drone attacks at as early as 4 a.m. in the morning, said the mayor of Moscow. We do understand that the defense forces intercepted the drones, 2 drones before they crashed, and 2 of them fell just near the defense building. There were no injuries that were recorded, but some non-residential buildings got some damages. We think that these are retaliatory attacks from Ukraine, especially after the Odessa attack city, and Ukraine probably is just trying to, tell Moscow that we can as well come as close as the Moscow city and in the center of Moscow. We understand that the attack at the Odessa city was affected. The cathedral, the Orthodox cathedral, was destroyed, and Ukraine is particularly angry about this and is keen to strike back.
Israel's parliament has voted through a controversial new law which significantly curbs the powers of the country's Supreme Court. Demonstrations against this bill have been taking place for months, with Israel's two biggest banks allowing workers to protest without losing pay. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed reports now on what the bill's passage means for the country.
In short, Jamie, it essentially means that the courts, the higher courts, the lower courts, their powers have been curtailed. And it means that the governing government, the coalition, can overrule the courts. And that's what was the concern of all these people here behind me. And by the way, Jamie, this is spontaneous. This has happened now within half an hour of this bill passing into law. These people showed up here on the street and they are blocking. This is a main thoroughfare in Tel Aviv. And this is the nucleus of the protest movement, has been for more than 6 months. It's a state of emergency is being called by protesters, telling people to get to the streets, and that's what we're seeing here. So what's going to happen is more laws will be passed. And that's the concern of the protesters. More laws that, again, will curtail the powers of the courts and of the judicial system, giving the government more power to enact laws and to put people, let's say, convicted people with records, criminal records, into positions, ministerial positions. And that was the concern all along. Jamie?
Protests against this change to the law have lasted for months and months. So has anyone compromised?
They've tried. Certainly, we were hearing last ditch up until 15 minutes before the vote actually started. We were hearing that there were attempts from both sides to reach some sort of compromise. It fell through, and now we have, this is the result. Yes, and there have been appeals to Prime Minister Netanyahu from heads of state, from former heads of the Mossad, military chiefs. President Biden, twice in 1 week, appealed to Prime Minister Netanyahu to back off, to not let this vote go through. It's not happening. I talked to someone here when this started and people were starting to take to the streets, and I said, so now that these laws are starting to go into effect, what card do you have in your deck? Now, what card is the protest movement going to play? He said, civil war.
BRICS countries have some of the world's fastest growing economies. China's senior diplomat Wang Yi is in Johannesburg meeting his BRICS counterparts from Brazil, Russia, India and South Africa. Their gathering is in preparation for a major summit of the economic grouping in August. CGTN's correspondent Sumitra Naidu is in Johannesburg. Sumitra, just give us the idea of the agenda. What's the focus of this meeting?
Right, so this is the 13th meeting of the BRICS National Security Advisors that's currently happening now. It's an annual meeting usually held before the BRICS Summit. It will form, as you say, the preparations for the BRICS Heads of State and Government Summit that's set to take place here on the 22nd of August here in Johannesburg. So diplomats are expected to deliberate on how BRICS member countries can effectively address traditional and non-traditional security threats in a coordinated manner, looking at enhancing solidarity and coordinating development for its member countries and beyond. Now, China's senior diplomat Wang Yi arrived in South Africa last night, and he was at the meeting today. He also held bilateral talks with some of his counterparts. Following his meeting with India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, he said that China and India are two major forces in the process of multipolarization. He reiterated that China and India are not at odds with each other. There's no threat to each other. Much of the sentiment was echoed by Doval, who said that India is willing to work with China in the spirit of mutual understanding. Looking at, the summit coming up, this is going to be one of the largest BRICS summit to be held. South Africa has invited over 60 heads of state from the global south to attend this year's BRICS summit. All 54 heads of state from Africa have been invited. There's been growing interest in the BRICS grouping, with over 20 countries from South America to the Middle East officially applying to become members of the grouping. So much of this participation will be discussed at the upcoming summit in August. Representatives of some of the countries interested were in South Africa last month to discuss their participation, looking at forging closer links with the BRICS bloc. So this year's summit is looking at expansion. There's also growing interest in a possible BRICS currency. Most countries are looking for a more beneficial alternative to the dollar. However, while there has been so much of interest, there has been lots of discussion, it's not going to be on the agenda next month. BRICS Ambassador Anil Shukla said there will be a focus on de-dollarization and the use more of local currencies in international trade, but the topic of a common BRICS currency will not be on the agenda.
Sumitra, thank you for that. Our correspondent Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Greece launches a massive rescue operation as wildfires rage, with blazes on the island of Rhodes said to be out of control.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen acts.
The difference is in the detail, in the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Jump-starting China's economy. Beijing's top decision-making body pledges to stabilise growth and adjust economic policies to give the world a boost.
Our other headlines: elections stalemate. Spain fails to produce a decisive winner, raising the prospect of another election.
And Twitter's famous blue bird flies the nest as the social media giant unveils new branding.
The concrete roof of a school gymnasium has collapsed in China, killing at least 11 people. Many of the victims are believed to be female volleyball players who were training in the building in Qiqihua City. The authorities say the illegal stacking of materials on the roof may have caused it to cave in. Our correspondent Jang Saran reports.
The city is for sure engulfed by shock and devastation following yesterday's tragedy happened in number 34 middle school. And it's reported that the school's girls volleyball team was actually training in the stadium when the roof fell down. And our hearts are heavy hearing that 11 have been found dead so far, and currently 4 are still being treated in the hospital. We're actually waiting here for a possible press conference later for more updates on the ongoing investigation. And just an hour ago, I was at the gate of the school and I saw the citizens and the graduates of the school. They were there just laying down the flowers and paying tributes to the victims. And according to the initial investigation, the cause of this tragedy was the non-standard construction process. And a great number of perlite beads were there left on the rooftop. And due to the rain, the beads could have become up to 3 or 4 times heavier. And this large increase in weight on the roof could have contributed to this structural collapse.
The Greek islands of Corfu and Evia are the latest to issue evacuation orders as the country grapples with devastating wildfires and sweltering temperatures.
Fires on the island of Rhodes remain out of control, forcing the mass evacuation of thousands of tourists and local people. Officials say some of the fires could have been caused by arson. Our correspondent Paul Barber reports.
Fleeing the inferno. These tourists trudging to safety on Corfu as the Greek island becomes the latest to order the evacuation of residents and holidaymakers. And this is what they're escaping from, a line of fire approaching the usually bustling coastline. The local government began sea departures overnight, with many tourists forced to spend the night in shelters and at the airport. Nearby Rhodes ordered its biggest evacuation ever over the weekend. 19,000 people moved to safety, many of them British tourists who were able to get home on repatriation flights put on by tour operators.
Well, close up it looked like hell on earth, to be honest. You know, there's a lot of fire, but I just hope everybody's okay.
It was really bad. We got out on Saturday night and it was carnage at the airport. And then we got put in a evacuation centre in Rhodes Island, and then no real kind of idea what was going on.
The deadly heat wave has seen temperatures over the past week exceed 40 degrees Celsius in many parts of Greece. Along with Rhodes and Corfu, emergency services are battling flames on the island of Evia, and 2 forest fires fanned by strong winds are raging to the west of Athens on the mainland. Some residents say they feel abandoned.
The fire spread around lunchtime. As you can see, everything is burnt. Houses are burnt. Our local officials were nowhere to be seen. Only one helicopter dropped water once.
As smoke continues to billow over the beaches of Rhodes, there's no end in sight. Conditions are forecast to persist in the coming days, and officials say the threat of further fires is high in almost every region of the country. Wildfires aren't unusual here during summer months, but climate change has taken it to a far more dangerous level. Paul Barber, CGTN.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Evangelo Sipsas, who's in Rhodes. Evangelo, what's happening now where you are?
Well, the situation is pretty much the same as before. The fire is burning out of control. There's strong winds up to 150 kilometers an hour, these gust winds that are fanning these fires, making them burning uncontrollable through the parts of Rhodes, the mountains right behind me. Yesterday, the flame was behind the mountains. Today, that flame has overtaken those mountains and is now threatening a number of villages just here in the valley right behind us. Unfortunately, as the sun is going down now, the planes and the helicopters that are flying from above will stop operating because it's dark. And we also have been reading that these airs will continue through today, tomorrow, and early on Wednesday. So the situation is going to be quite difficult for the next few days. And even the Greek Prime Minister mentioned that the next few weeks and next month is going to be quite difficult because of the winds and the high temperatures that are going to persist here in the country.
And we heard a bit about the impact this is having on tourism in Paul's report, but what about the impact it's having on local people and the economy?
Well, those two are very well connected because the local economy and the locals do rely heavily on tourism. And this evacuation of the 19,000 that are leaving and the announcements of different operators canceling their flights to the island, of course, is a big blow to the tourism, to the economy here, because let's not forget that the island every year hosts about 2.5 million tourists. But it's not only tourism that people live off. There's a number of agricultural trades that people use, from olives to olive oil to a number of other things that they grow to export. But also, people have also lost their houses. They're lost everything they built all these years with their savings. We spoke to some of those people who lost everything and others that are quite angry towards the local authorities, and this is what they had to tell us.
You know, all the tourists, they are protected, sorry to say that. They have water and everything and so on. They left a mess on the beach. All my friends, I don't know, nothing. I'm just scared.
All those that are part of the local authorities, they have different opinions. They blame each other, and in the end there is no one left to blame. The truth is that all of them are at fault. If you don't create fire zones from the beginning, this is what is going to happen. Look now, everything is burning and it won't stop.
And that's what everybody is saying, that for the locals it was easier for the tourists, it was easier for them to get evacuated as they received alerts almost immediately. But the locals are saying that those alerts only came into the 5th or the 6th day of those fires that were burning. They said, of course, that if the local authorities did take those precautions in making fire zones and cleaning the forest, what the island is going through right now and what you see right behind me would have been prevented. And they're pointing the finger to the local authorities, and they're very angry towards them. So in the next few days, we're going to see how it's going to unfold and who is going to take responsibility for this.
Evangelo, thank you very much. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Rhodes. Well, Tom Jenkins is the CEO at the European Tourism Association. I asked him about the impact this would have on Greece's tourism sector.
I think Greece actually no one did well in the pandemic, but Greece was actually, of all the destinations in Europe, Greece had a slightly less worse one than the other ones. They kept both their infection rates right down and were welcoming to visitors really throughout 2022 and to a certain extent 2021. So Greece didn't do that badly during the pandemic. I think it's also important to realise it's affecting 3 islands, 3 quite important islands in Greece. It's not affecting the mainland, and it's not affecting the other 5,900 odd islands that there are in Greece. So it's very traumatic for those affected. It's significant for the holiday makers in those islands, but it's not that dramatic if you look at Greece as a whole.
But nevertheless, people potentially cancelling their holidays because they're worried about it. Some flights not going to and from, and it must nevertheless have an effect on the tourism industry in places like Rhodes and Corfu.
Oh, no, if you've got a wildfire, this is not good for tourism. I'm not for one moment pretending it, but all I'm emphasising is that this is a very localised problem. I'm not for one moment questioning that if you've got a holiday booked in Rhodes, Kea or Corfu, you will be looking very carefully at what the situation is. And if you're there, you're either not affected, because there are parts of these islands which are not affected, or you're being evacuated. And I do not for one moment question the severity of that. All I'm stressing is that as a whole, Greece, this is one portion of Greece, one small portion of Greece.
Do you think, though, that this will have an effect on where people choose to holiday, both later this year and in the future?
Well, the amazing thing about the temperatures that we're seeing in the Mediterranean, apart from the extraordinary heat, is the fact that it doesn't appear to have too much impact on demand. I think that's partly because people who had booked to go to Greece and indeed the Mediterranean in July were expecting heat. They probably weren't expecting quite as much heat as they're getting at the moment. But at the moment, demand's not affected. It will be affected, do not get me wrong, for the affected areas which are being hit by wildfires. But I don't see any change in demand. But it's early days, because it's only been occurring over the last 4 to 5 days or so.
So how does the tourism industry mitigate against something like this? What kind of protections in place for businesses and holidaymakers?
Well, you can't, is the short answer. All you can do is that if such a catastrophe occurs, make sure that you've got your emergency procedures in place. And I'm pleased to say that so far that we haven't had any reports of any deaths or any injuries from this. Huge quantities of inconvenience, but this is a wildfire. This causes problems, but at the moment, the industry seems to be responding to it.
At least 30 people have been killed in Afghanistan, where flooding caused by heavy monsoon rain washed away homes. Dozens of people are missing in the Jalrez district east of the capital, Kabul. Afghanistan's ruling Taliban issued a condolence message calling on aid groups to help bereaved families.
The European Union's crop monitoring service has reduced its forecasts for this year's harvest, citing drier than usual weather combined with warmer temperatures. It's warned that the Iberian Peninsula and northern Italy could have suffered potentially irreversible damage after recent intense heat waves.
So climate change having a severe impact on rice production, with warmer temperatures and rising sea levels cutting harvest yields. But scientists in the Philippines say they're breeding rice varieties that can survive extreme weather. Our correspondent Gretchen Malalad reports.
Rice is a food staple for over 4 billion people across the globe. But the future of global rice supply hangs in the balance. Extreme heat and drought produces rice harvest yields. Rising seas inundate low-lying rice fields with salt water. Extreme rainfall destroys hectares of paddy fields. Many farmers are also shifting to other agricultural crops to survive and make a living. Dr. Johar Ali is the head of the hybrid rice technology at the International Rice Research Institute, or IRRI. He says in the next decade, the effects of climate change will get worse and it could threaten global food security.
Rice is in a different kind of challenge here. And we have to produce more food with the limitation of time, the imports, and all sorts of challenges that is emerging with the climate change and other things. So in that perspective, to put the food on the table in the next decade would be the biggest challenge that the scientists will face.
Scientists at the Rice Institute have been developing rice seedlings that can survive extreme changes in climate. This rainout shelter mimics drought conditions. This is where they experiment different kinds of rice seedlings that can still thrive with less water. There are also paddy fields where they inundate with water to test seed varieties that can endure and recover from flooding. They are also at the forefront of cutting-edge rice farming innovations.
I'm here inside the International Rice Gene Bank, which is the largest repository of rice seeds in the world. There are around 132,000 sample sets here. The temperature is around 2 degrees Celsius, which help preserve the seeds to last up to 40 years. This is also where scientists select the genetic traits of seeds used to breed varieties that can survive unforeseen climate shocks.
Dr. Ali has worked and learned from Chinese agronomist Yuan Longping, who is the father of hybrid rice. He says the fundamental of Longping's two-line hybrid rice technology has been the basis for most of their research. Dr. Ali is leading the Green Super Rice project at the Rice Institute. They have successfully developed 35 hybrid rice varieties that are resistant to extreme climate shifts. 26 varieties are now being used in farms across the Philippines.
If you put your rice in the shortest duration and highest yield, that means you are putting your plant 110 days, less than 110 days, it should mature and yield. And at the same time, the water required would become reduced, the land utilization will be less, and yield should be higher than.
Traditional rice cultivation methods contribute around 10% of man-made methane emissions globally. The Rice Institute is now developing rice varieties and innovative methods that could help lower greenhouse emissions. Gretchen Malalad, CGTN, Laguna Province.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. big boost for cinema in the Barbenheimer battle, with starkly different films drawing huge crowds to the silver screen.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The movie phenomenon Barbenheimer is the box office sensation of the year. The films are polar opposites in theme, but drew huge crowds at the weekend.
A comedy based on the Mattel doll Barbie claimed top spot with a massive $155 million in US ticket sales, making it the biggest American debut so far this year. Meanwhile, Oppenheimer, a haunting tale about the making of the atomic bomb, earned $80.5 million.
Well, let's talk to the film industry expert, Karen Krisanovich. Karen, welcome. Good to see you. Well, who could have known that two nostalgia films could throw cinema a much-needed lifeline for its future?
You know, I hadn't thought of them as nostalgia films, but they are, in fact. And it's astonishing that Barbie has taken globally 337 million, and Oppenheimer 174 million, which, considering it's 3 hours long, is really extraordinary.
So both nostalgia films, perhaps, but essentially two very different films. Why have they been so successful? What is it that they're appealing to?
Well, first of all, they had remarkable marketing campaigns, and they showed us things that we hadn't seen before. I mean, particularly Barbie looked fun. People, you know, it appeals to a wide range of people that dress up and go. If you wear pink, you can go. You feel like you're part of the film. With Oppenheimer, I mean, I know the story, and a lot of people do. It's a serious but seriously beautiful look at a point in the world's history that we can never go back from. And for that point, it's beautiful and profound. So it's really everything that you'd want in the cinema rolled into two films.
It sounds like comfort blankets, really. I mean, what is it about our times that we want to relive our childhoods?
Well, I think when we were children, we thought the world was getting to be a better place, and it's starting to feel like it's not. So we'd like to go back and relive some of the good feelings, have a little bit of relief. I mean, granted, Oppenheimer is an ominous film. It's about where we're living now, really. And it's not particularly comforting, but it's beautifully done. It is a beautiful, absorbing film.
Neither of them, though, the typical film that you see being a big hit during the summer, something like a family movie or a superhero movie, these are pretty different, aren't they?
Well, Barbie, not everybody, the dads, may not want to go see Barbie. A lot of masculine people probably wouldn't want to go. But it is great fun for mothers and daughters and grandmothers and children and teens. But it appeals to two different strata of moviegoers: the more intellectual, serious people, and then the other people that, you know, buy the popcorn and are on their phones and you know, want to watch as well. So it really just appeals to people that maybe don't understand or didn't grow up with the habit of going to the cinema.
I mean, Karen, just spell it out for us, just in terms of business, how important are these two films? And we all know about cinema's COVID crisis and the streaming crisis, but what kind of state is cinema going in, and how significant were these two movies this weekend?
Well, we like to say that Tom Cruise has been saving cinema for the last 2 years with Top Gun and Mission Impossible, which he has been doing. But these are something new and fresh. And this is what Hollywood is risk averse, and these are very risky films. So I think that this is giving us the uplifting of cinema that we really wanted, because the cinema experience has not really recovered from COVID. It's almost there, but not really. And so these two films are vital to the industry and also to people's experiences.
Karen, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme. That's film industry commentator Karen Krasaunovich.
Football, and Ari Borges scored a hat-trick as Brazil got off to a winning start at the World Cup, beating Panama 4-0. Panama are playing at their first finals and went behind after 19 minutes, with Borges then going on to become the only fourth Brazilian woman to score a World Cup hat-trick. Brazil has featured at every tournament, but are yet to get their hands on the World Cup trophy. They play France next.
Germany secured the biggest win of the tournament so far, beating debutantes Morocco by 6-0. Alexandra Popp scored twice for the two-time world champions, but it was still an historic day for Morocco, who became the first Arab team to play a match at a Women's World Cup.
And Italy beat Argentina 1-0 in Group G. Substitute Cristiana Girelli headed in the only goal in the 87th minute. Next up for Italy, it's Sweden, while Argentina face South Africa.
Well, this year's FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand has been breaking records for attendance, and it's providing a welcome boost to both countries' economies. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
I'm here in the Western Australia city of Perth. This is one of 5 Australian cities that'll be hosting 35 of the tournament's 64 games. Now, 1.4 million tickets have been sold here. That's more than the last FIFA Women's World Cup. And that's welcome news for the host nations, expecting to generate nearly $600 million for Australia alone. Now, geography is playing a big role in that economic boost for hotels and restaurants here. Around 55,000 international visitors are projected to come here over the tournament, mainly from the US, the UK, and Europe. And while those visitors may attend only a couple of matches, because of the distance it takes to come to this part of the world, officials are expecting a lot of those visitors to turn their trips into an extended holiday, use the extra time to see other parts of the country as well. And there is also a domestic tourism side to this, where people in Australia are taking advantage of the rare opportunity to see Women's World Cup games in their own country and traveling domestically to do so. And unlike other international sporting events, including the Olympics, this tournament doesn't involve a great deal of building infrastructure. In fact, all of the games that are being played in this particular Women's World Cup are taking place in existing stadiums, adding value to hosting an event like this. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Perth.
Paris Saint-Germain have accepted a world record bid of over $330 million from Saudi Arabian side Al Hilal for Kylian Mbappe. The Saudis can now hold talks with the France captain. He's out of contract next year and has been left out of the French side's pre-season tour of Japan after refusing to extend his deal. Al Hilal also approached Lionel Messi after his PSG contract expired, offering him a deal worth $500 million a year, but he opted to join MLS team Inter Miami instead. The headlines again. Jump-starting China's economy, Beijing's top decision-making body pledges to stabilize growth and adjust economic policies to give the world a boost.
Election stalemate. Spain fails to produce a decisive winner, raising the prospect of another election.
And more Greek islands issue evacuation orders for thousands of people as the country battles devastating wildfires.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.